nice here, except I look like this and sound like a saxophone. That's because it's not Minecraft, it's Vintage Story. And it's been brought up in the comments of every single one of my videos, even the ones that aren't about geology. It describes itself as an uncompromising wilderness survival sandbox game inspired by eldritch horror themes. Find yourself in a ruined world, reclaimed by nature, and permeated by unnerving temporal disturbances. Relive the advent of human civilization, or take your own path. It was initially inspired by Minecraft, but besides the base structure being an open-world sandbox survival voxel game where you collect resources, build, and survive, they are very different. It has nearly 10,000 blocks, items, and entities, including an extensive amount of trees, flowers, and vegetation, animals, mushrooms, sailboats, and coral reefs, gears, and many other things, even vertical slabs, but most importantly, a ton of geology. I've played over 150 hours in survival, did a lot more in creative exploration, and chatted with the lead dev. I'm a geologist in real life, and this is a geologic review of Vintage Story. The amount of things we need to cover in this review is extensive, so I'm dividing it into two parts. This first one will cover rocks, sediment, and world gen, and then the second will cover ores, geologic structures, and game mechanics related to geology. I'll be comparing things to real life, and I'll get pedantic about things, but a little inconsistency with reality is fine, or even good in many cases. Real life can be boring, and a game's job is to make those things interesting and engaging. Vintage Story started out as a one-man project, but it's still a small indie team of about 20 people, and they are consistently updating the game. My criticisms should be taken with a grain of salt, and not me just saying that something is bad. I will be giving my thoughts on some possible changes though, and at the end of part 2, I'll discuss my opinions about the rest of the gameplay as well. The developers state that Vintage Story is heavily inspired by natural processes of the real world, and brings them into a game in a fun and enjoyable way. Our aim is to capture the beauty of the natural world and amplify the existence within our game. This increased focus on realism comes with much of the crafting not being done in an inventory or a crafting bench, but in the world itself. I'm not going to continually compare everything to Minecraft, but some things are unavoidable. Just to showcase the difference between the two games, let's discuss the steps to get to iron. Most people are so familiar with Minecraft steps that I don't need to show this, but punch trees, make crafting bench, make a wood pick, mine stone, make a stone pick, mine coal, stone, and iron ore, make a furnace, smelt iron, make iron pick. This whole process took me 3 minutes, which is quick, but I'm no speedrunner. Now, let's do Vintage Story. Pick up some sticks and flint. Nap stone, knife, and shovel. Get attacked by bear. Nap a stone axe. Cut some reeds. Chop some trees. Cut some grass. Dig some clay and peat. Dab a clay crucible. Get attacked by a shiver. Dab hammer and pickaxe mold. Dig firing pits. Make a fire in a torch. Place molds in pits. Fill pits with grass, sticks, and peat. Light pits. Find copper bits. Mark on map. Take out molds. Make tongs. Cut down more trees. Pile up the wood. Dig some soil. Bury the wood. Make a fire on top and close it all in. Wait. Acquire charcoal. Place copper nuggets in crucible and add charcoal to fire. Pour copper into molds and wait. Make copper pick and hammer. Dig below copper nugget spot. Mine all the copper. Make and fire prospecting pick mold. Melt more copper. Pour the mold. Prospect and find tin vein. Dab an anvil mold. Smelt a lot of bronze. Pour an anvil, hammer, and pick. Burn some flint. Make ingot molds. Quarry some blocks. Make 2 bronze ingots. Build forge. Heat ingot and forge chisel. Make quern. Grind calcinated flint. Make fire clay, bricks, and then fire them. Prospect and mine iron ore. Make a bloomery. Break ore into nuggets. Add fuel and light. Break bloomery and get blooms. Heat bloom. Remove slag and form into ingot. Form pick from ingot. To record this, I cheated. I went back and forth from creative to survival for each step, and it still took me almost 3 hours. In my survival world, it took me nearly 80 hours to get to iron. And after that is steel, the current highest tier of metal in the game, and that has even more elaborate steps. Before we get started on geology, I want to touch on some of the other details. Vintage Story has weather, temperature, and seasons, which actually changes based on your distance from an effective equator, which in turn also affects the possible vegetation. The position of the sun not only varies with time of day, but also month and latitude. If you are near the North Pole, the sun will never set in the summer. Since the sun actually casts shadows based on its location, you can make a working sundial. This attention to detail continues underground, and the rocks that make up the world are highly varied and aren't just horizontal layers at specific depths. Since Vintage Story gives so much care to natural materials, we're going to start at the beginning with rocks. Vintage Story has a huge variety of rocks, and they are utilized in the game in 3 rough areas. There are those that are generated as structures or part of structures, like this geode. Some are treated more like ore deposits, like coal. Yes, it's technically a rock. And then there are the ones that can form the bedrock of an area. In real life, bedrock is the first solid rock layer you encounter below your feet, not some impervious rock at the bottom of the world. Vintage Story does have that at 100 meters below the surface, but they more appropriately call the bottom of the world the mantle. Vintage Story's default distance from equator to pole is 10,000 blocks, or meters. Earth's distance is about 10 million meters, and if you are on land, the mantle is, on average, about 50,000 meters below you. So if we assume the game's crust is scaled the same way, then the Vintage Story mantle would be about 500 blocks down, or 400 more than it is in the game, which is actually a lot closer to realistic than I thought it would be. And it's great to have the mantle represented, plus 10 points. Vintage Story has 14 rocks that can make up the bedrock and underlying strata of the world. They will be the focus while we discuss World Gen, and the rest will be covered in detail when we discuss their specific structures. In real life, we subdivide rocks into 3 categories: Igneous, Sedimentary, and Metamorphic. And at some point, all terrestrial rocks began their journey as magma. If it cools down, it forms our first rock type, igneous rocks. We name these rocks based on their chemistry and sort of how long it took them to cool down, which we see as crystal size. The longer it takes, the more time the crystals have to grow. Magma that cools down underground forms plutonic rocks, or erupts at the surface as lava and forms volcanic versions of the same rock. Same elements, same minerals, just different crystal size. This difference in cooling time isn't hours or days, but can be millions of years. We also refer to these rocks as intrusive or extrusive. Plate tectonics recycle these rocks by pulling them down into the mantle, where they can melt again. This process eventually causes the heavier elements to sink and the lighter ones to float. Also, as magma cools, it doesn't all freeze at the same time. Iron-rich minerals are the first to form around 1400 degrees C, and the last minerals, usually including quartz, form around 800 to 500 degrees C. This is called fractional crystallization, and both of these processes are part of what lead to a chemical segregation of rocks based on their iron and silica content. Geologists use the terms mafic, a portmanteau of magnesium and ferric for iron-rich rocks, and the term felsic, based on feldspar and silica for silica-rich rocks, feldspar being the most common mineral found in them. Starting with ultramafic rocks, there is volcanic komatiite and plutonic peridotite. The white signs here are the rocks that are not in Vintage Story. The upper mantle in real life is dominantly peridotite, so having both is a little redundant, but the mantle is a place and not a rock description. And we do have peridotite not in the mantle, like this piece here. It was a part of the mantle, but it was brought up with some lava in a volcano. That lava happens to be basalt, which is an extrusive mafic rock, the intrusive version being gabbro. The next class is intermediate with diorite and andesite. Vintage Story only has andesite, which is named after the Andes Mountains. Once you get greater than 63% silica, the rocks are called felsic, which sort of has 2 divisions inside of it. First, you have dacite and granodiorite, neither of which are in Vintage Story. And then you have the most felsic igneous rocks we all know and love, granite and rhyolite. The Vintage Story granite is gray, and in real life, the color of granite can be white, gray, or pink, depending on the specific minerals present. Growing up near St. Louis, I'm more familiar with pink granite. Here is some, and some rhyolite from there too. Some of the roads in the historic district still have the original cobblestones that were made from the local granite, which is actually the crystalline basement rock of the area too. When I was growing up, many of the modern roads had the cobblestones still under them, and when they did construction, you could find piles of them around the city. This one here is smooth on one side due to years of horse hooves wearing it down. And as with anything, igneous rocks are more complicated than this. But in general, this is the normal breakdown you learn in an introductory class. The Vintage Story does have a few other igneous rocks that are not terrain forming. There is obsidian, which you can find in the game as lenses inside basalt, but they are normally not found together in real life. Obsidian is a volcanic glass, meaning that it cooled down so fast that minerals didn't have time to form. So you have a solid with atoms that are just stuck where they were. Obsidian's specific elemental abundances are the same as granite and rhyolite. So if you had some volcanic glass of basaltic composition, it's called trachyte. And you normally don't have very mafic and very felsic rocks right next to each other. A great inclusion is the addition of kimberlite, which is a different type of ultramafic volcanic rock, and we'll talk more about it in its own section in part 2. Vintage Story also has scoria and tuff blocks, but as of 1.21.5, they are not implemented into the game, and you can only access them in the creative inventory. But briefly, scoria is similar to pumice, but heavier due to more iron, and tuff is the term for a deposit of volcanic ash, which can be any volcanic composition. Vintage Story's selection of igneous rocks is a bit limited. Personally, it would be cool to see the rest of the common igneous rocks added, but in game design, you have to think about what an addition actually adds to the game. Igneous rocks are some of the most durable natural materials on Earth, but even they do not last forever. So before we get to our next rock type, we need to cover an intermediary step, sediment. This is an outcrop of granite, and if I tap it with a hammer, it has a nice sharp tink noise. This other one, however, has a dull, almost hollow sound. And that is because this rock is breaking down, both physically and chemically. This is where some of the sounds from my ending music came from. When people think of erosion and weathering, they probably normally think of wind, rain, and flowing water physically breaking down the rock into smaller and smaller pieces. Or maybe water getting into cracks and freezing and making those cracks bigger. But even in dry areas, just the sun warming up rocks can cause the surface to expand and fracture. Vintage Story represents the different stages of weathering with cracked rock, boulders, stones, which you could consider cobble-sized, then gravel and sand. All of the rocks that form topography have sediment versions of these sizes, and you can find them near the surface, sometimes sitting on the soil representing what the underlying rock is, or exposed on the surface in dry areas, which leads to some strange sounding sediment like sandstone sand, but it's mostly actually fine. Here is a sandstone called St. Pete sandstone, which was deposited on a beach about 450 million years ago during the Ordovician. Presently, it's breaking down where it's exposed and becoming sand again. Technically, it's sandstone sand. Besides these physical changes happening to the rocks, there are also chemical changes. The minerals that make up the rocks can contain elements like calcium, sodium, potassium, and magnesium, which are more soluble than others, and water can dissolve them out of the rock. The salt in the ocean originally started as sodium in rocks and chlorine from volcanic gases. In the presence of water, some minerals will alter into new minerals. Many of these are small, platy clay minerals, and Vintage Story does have clay, but it treats the deposits more like ore, so we're going to cover it in that section. There are a few other gravels that Vintage Story uses in features, like muddy, sludgy, or dirty gravel of various moistures. These are mostly used in structures or at the bottom of bodies of water. These are a mix of two different sizes of sediment. Usually they would be stratified, but there are outliers where you can find them mixed like this. I really have zero notes for the variety of sediments that Vintage Story has. Really great, actually. There is even different sand textures for ones found on land versus ones found in marine settings. Most sediments usually come to rest and get buried by more sediment. Given time, those same waters that have elements dissolved in them can precipitate crystals around the sediment and bind those loose pieces together into our next rock type, sedimentary rock. Rocks that are formed from sediment of gravel-sized or larger class are called conglomerates. Sand-sized makes sandstone. Clay-sized particles can form claystone or shale. The distinction between the two is that shale has visible layers and claystone does not. It would be nice if the conglomerate texture had some visible clast, sort of like the flint blocks in Vintage Story. But technically, gravel is sediment larger than 2 millimeters, and assuming that Vintage Story blocks are 1 meter, then each pixel is 31.25 millimeters. So the clast could easily be gravel and not be visible at this resolution. This does make the finer grain blocks look stranger to me, Everything looks to have the same coarseness, and it would be nice if the clay textures were smoother and the shale texture had some horizontal distinction to represent the fact that it is in fact layered. Next, we have sedimentary rocks that don't necessarily come directly from lithic sediment, or sediment that is just little pieces of rocks or minerals. Limestone can be a very complicated rock. Water that is saturated in calcium can directly precipitate calcite minerals into the water. They fall down as lime mud and can eventually form limestone. Or organisms can take up the calcium in the water to make shells, and when they die, they leave it behind. Real-life limestone is often packed with the shells of the organisms that lived at the time. These can be macroscopic organisms like these brachiopods, but the most productive organisms on the planet are some of the smallest and near the bottom of the food chain. Vintage Story also has chalk, which is a sedimentary rock composed primarily of the skeletons of calcareous plankton. In real life, the White Cliffs of Dover are a famous outcrop of chalk, which is primarily composed of coccolithophores. Each organism is about 10 microns in size, so the cliffs are the product of over 1 million years of life and death, and hundreds of skeletons stacked on top of each other just to equal 1 millimeter of sediment. Many other zooplankton and phytoplankton make hard mineralized parts as part of their body that become sediment when they die. I don't know when I'll get another chance to talk about this in a video, so allow me to just show you how cool some of these look. Here are some scanning electron microscope images that I took of some Bering Strait marine sediment. Foraminifera are another carbonate-using organism, but there are also many that use silica, or more accurately, biogenic silica. Pictured here are diatoms and radiolarians, and sponges also produce small silica support pieces for their body that eventually become sediment. These silica-rich sediments can lithify into a rock called chert. The last of the vintage story sedimentary rocks that can form topography is bauxite. When water is dissolving elements from the rocks, it effectively causes the ones that are left behind to become enriched. One of those elements is aluminum, and bauxite is our main source for that metal. The protolith, or original rock, can vary, but in hot, wet environments, rock can undergo lateritic weathering, and the aluminum that is left behind will form hydroxide minerals like gibbsite and others that grow outward in little globules. It's fascinating to have it as a base rock in the game, but the dev said that there is no plans to implement aluminum as a metal. There are a few other sedimentary rocks in the game that aren't terrain forming, so we'll talk about them in more depth later. Halite is the mineral name for table salt, NaCl, and when large bodies of water dry up, it's one of the minerals that gets left behind. Like I mentioned earlier, coal is technically a sedimentary rock, but they treat it like an ore in the game. Vintage Story has multiple grades of it, which you can find in sedimentary rocks, which is mostly fine. The highest grade of coal, anthracite, is technically a metamorphic rock, which is what we're talking about next. But before then, overall, Vintage Story has a very good coverage of sedimentary rocks. It's got all of the main ones, and then some of the lesser known varieties. There are many others like breccias and tillites, or my favorite, banded iron formations, but overall, the coverage is exceptionally good. If rocks are buried deeply, their minerals might not be the most stable forms they could be in, so they will change their composition and size, and the rock transforms into metamorphic rock. The most well-known series of changes happens in shales. With increasing pressure and temperature, they change to slate, phyllite, schist, and then gneiss. Vintage Story only has the first 2 rocks in this series. These new minerals align themselves perpendicular to the direction of greatest stress. This causes most metamorphic rocks to develop some sort of foliation. So similar to the shale, I would have some horizontal banding in the texture. Some rocks don't change much chemically, but the crystals rearrange their shape. Sandstones become quartzite. This is some 1.6 billion year old Baraboo quartzite from Wisconsin. It's purple due to iron, and you can still see some of the larger sand grains of the original sandstone. Carbonate rocks like limestone become marbles, which Vintage Story does have as lenses inside phyllite and slate. Some igneous rocks do metamorphose under great pressure and temperature. One of my favorites is eclogite, which was originally basalt. These higher grades of metamorphic rocks like schist and gneiss and eclogite usually have garnets in them, so if you wanted another type of gem in the game, they would be a good choice. And there is one higher grade above gneiss called migmatite, which has some partial melting of the rock. This is an example of migmatite, or maybe some very hot and folded gneiss. But beyond this is just magma, and the rock cycle starts all over. So that almost covers all the types of rocks, but just to be 100%, the game has several varieties of ice, which, yes, they are technically igneous rocks, I guess, and yes, maybe water is lava. In Vintage Story, you can find ice at high elevations year-round, even in temperate climates, and snow accumulates in winter if the temperature is right. The last rock to touch on is called subite, and it results from meteorite impacts. But it's more of a thing that happens to a rock and not a specific composition of rock. We'll cover it later. Lastly, before we get to World Gen, is soils. It warms my heart to see how much attention was given to soils, and it's important to learn about it in-game because agriculture is a key point of survival. You don't need to just eat, you need a variety of food. Your character sheet has these bars, and how full each one of them is determines your max health. A real cool way to encourage the player not to just have a stack of steak. Not that that would work here either because food does rot. In real life, soil is highly variable and dependent on many factors. Soil scientists have the awesome acronym of CLORPT for climate, organics, relief, parent material, and time. Vintage Story isn't as elaborate as that, but it does have a variety of soils. In wooded areas, it's called forest floor, and when you dig it up, it becomes low fertility soil. This is accurate to real life. Forests do not have good soil. Almost all of the nutrient cycling is near the surface with organics, and you don't have high-value soils like you find in prairies and other places. In more open areas, you can find patches of higher fertility soils. When you get to agriculture in the game, you can hoe a block, and you can see its nutrient levels. Different crops remove nutrients from the soil, and the less it has of what the plant needs, the slower it grows. You can practice crop rotation and keep everything at higher levels, or you can add fertilizers. The highest tier of soil in the game can only be made, and it's called terra preta, which is a real thing. The Amazonian people had poor soils, and to develop agriculture, they had to improve its quality. They did this by mixing charcoal, manure, pottery shards, bones, and even fish into the soil, and over years, created a highly productive mix. I think Vintage Story does a great job with soils, but it would be awesome to see different types of soils based on inputs like climate and the underlying rock. Now that we know all the rocks, sediment, soils, we can move on to how they are arranged during World Gen. The game first generates a bunch of noise maps. These maps that I exported from the game cover about 200 by 200 chunks, and a Vintage Story chunk is 32 blocks. So this is almost 40 square kilometers. The game uses 2 of them to generate topography. The upheaval map controls large-scale regional elevations, so the base world isn't so flat, and then the landform map controls the small-scale topography. Each color here is a specific type of landform, and there are over 50 different types, some more realistic than others. On average, there are about 64 chunks each, and they all blend into their neighbors to create a highly varied landscape. These fully generated chunks that I'm showing are in a dry environment, just so we can more focus on the topography. But during actual World Gen, everything starts as solid granite. In real life, the behavior and appearance of what rocks you find where and what order they are in can broadly be grouped into 6 geologic provinces, and these are actually what Vintage Story bases its rock strata on. The noise map even uses the same colors as this USGS map. Each province in-game has some rules for what rocks can go where, and these provinces are huge, most of them being thousands of chunks. So you end up with many different landforms in a single province, and the player usually has to travel a good distance to find something new. No matter where you're at on Earth, below your feet at some depth is an igneous rock sitting on top of the mantle, and geologists call this the crystalline basement rock. That granite from St. Louis is the crystalline basement rock there. If you dig down, that's the rock all the way down to the mantle. Felsic rocks, like granite, are less dense than mafic rocks, and because of that, they literally float on the mantle and can still be exposed on the surface, forming our first geologic province, the shield. These are the stable interior parts of continents and are generally quite old. Shield provinces on Earth are composed of plutonic rocks, usually granites, granodiorites, and high-grade metamorphic rocks like gneiss. In Vintage Story, we can look at the Shield province code and see that the maximum allowed rock thickness is 255 layers of any igneous rock, not just plutonic rocks. And we don't have gneiss, even though the comment mentions metamorphic rock. This example here has andesite at the base and then granite on the top, and a little sliver of peridotite in the middle. This could happen in real life, but not in a shield province, at least not exactly like this. Since the game has a limited number of appropriate rocks, it's fine. If I was going to change it, I would add the other plutonic rocks and just have those be the bottom option. More realistically, it would only be the more felsic rocks that would form the shield, which might be too boring for a game, but maybe there could be some more varieties of granite, like pink, gray, and white. Like we talked about earlier, most rocks don't get to just sit around for billions of years. They break down and form layers of sedimentary rocks around the edges of these shields and form our next province, platforms. The game's platform places a maximum of 40 blocks of sedimentary rock starting from the top, but it actually places the individual layers of sedimentary rock within the sedimentary section from the bottom up. This way you can have some variation at the surface and not just have sandstone everywhere. Vintage Story platforms can also have up to 10 blocks of metamorphic rocks between the igneous and the sedimentary. These layers are all maximum values, so you could still have exposed igneous rocks at the surface in a platform, like this example here. In the code, certain rock layers are placed from the top down or from the bottom up. The sedimentary rocks are all placed top down, which makes it follow topography. In reality, these sediments should be mostly horizontal layers filling in low areas of topography, not just draped over the underlying rocks. The way that these are presented here makes it look like the rock layers got folded and eroded down to this layer. To achieve something more realistic, I almost want to say that the igneous rocks should be top down and follow topography, or maybe just the top igneous layer and then the sedimentary layer should be bottom up, opposite of what it is now. My quick mock-up here shows that this is maybe not the most interesting near the surface, and now it looks like maybe just erosion follows the underlying igneous rocks. I would also increase the number of sedimentary layers and make them not entirely horizontal. And then to fix the shape of the igneous rocks matching topography, it might be possible to generate a second landform map, maybe just by adding one to the world seed, and then use that map for subsurface topography, for lack of a better word. Platforms can have metamorphic rocks at the bottom, but more commonly they are associated with orogenic provinces. These are areas where tectonic plates are colliding, and usually this creates an uplifting and folding of the crust that forms mountains. In Vintage Story, since the landforms are not tied to geologic provinces, you can have flat plains that are orogenic. Even though this is a bit off, this can happen in real life too. Mountains age and wear down. The Appalachian Mountains are all orogenic, but in some areas now, they are gentle hills. The strange part about how Vintage Story does its world gen is that orogenic provinces only have 10 layers of metamorphic rocks, when it should be much thicker. I do like this example here. Even though it's low topography, it looks like there are folds in the rock. This is another example of where I would use a second landform map to generate layers that don't just follow the surface. In real life, these heavy mountains actually sit lower in the mantle. This also pulls the plates next to them lower down. And besides the direct areas getting crushed, the plates can buckle and warp and create low points. These areas can accumulate sediment that becomes sedimentary rocks and are called basins. And I don't have much to say about them. In Vintage Story, basins do have the most potential layers of sedimentary rock, which is good, but for some reason it also has the most metamorphic rocks. More on that later. The sedimentary rocks also have the same issues that other provinces have, where they should be more horizontal in filling low areas, but that'll be the same for every province. The last two provinces are a bit more complicated. The first being large, igneous provinces. At certain times in Earth's history, there has been massive volcanic events, possibly caused by plumes of mantle material rising up and erupting hundreds of thousands or even millions of cubic kilometers of lava onto the surface. Many of these events are often proposed as causes of mass extinctions, like the Deccan Traps of India and the extinction of the dinosaurs. Not the main cause of that, but they probably didn't help. And I said that these are possibly caused by mantle plumes because it's not limited to them and or even really known if that's what's causing them. These volcanics are mafic, usually basaltic in composition. So Vintage Story creates these by having a layer of basalt on the surface. This is one of the few provinces that you can have sedimentary rocks below basalt. The same issue exists with basalt that does for the sedimentary rocks. Really, these basalts are flooding the surface and filling topography, not draping over the top of them. If tuff gets added into World Gen, this is how you would do it. A layer of ash covering the surface. The second complicated province is called extended crust, which just makes me think of pizza. There are several places on Earth where the crust is being pulled and thin, like what is happening in the Danakil Depression in Africa today. The crust is being pulled apart, and maybe someday there will be an ocean there. In vintage story, there isn't much difference between the large igneous provinces and the extended crust, except that it can have twice as many possible sedimentary layers. The real difference in game is that this province is geologically active, and is where you can find thermal pools, under which you will always find magma chambers, and magma has a higher chance of spawning in general in this province. And we will talk more about both of these features in part 2. That covers all of the surface provinces, but it leaves out the majority of the planet. I'm not really sure why oceanic crust is left off the list of provinces. It's not on the wiki page, but it is on the map at least. Vintage Story doesn't have an oceanic crust, but since it recently added sailboats, corals, and a ton more fish, it would be cool for it to have its own province. In real life, the oceanic plates have a defined sequence of rocks called an ophiolite. At mid-ocean ridges, where the oceanic plates are going in opposite directions, lava rises up to fill that space. You have pertite at the bottom, then gabbro, then sheeted dikes of basalt, and then where you get direct interaction of lava with water, it forms structures called pillows. Once those are formed, sediment can collect on top. I haven't explored the oceans much in Vintage Story, but it would be cool for them to have something similar to this. Also, add one of those old-timey diving suits. Before moving on, I want to talk about some limitations and suggestions. All of these provinces blend into each other, which can lead to some strange layering of rocks. For some reason, this piece of orogenic province has phyllite at the bottom of the world. But this example is great. It starts out as a basin and then becomes extended crust with some basalt on top. Then it transitions back into a basin. This could be very accurate to real life, but things are often a lot messier. You have abrupt changes like faults and folds, which are very difficult to procedurally generate in a realistic way. My lowest hanging fruit would be to adjust the distribution of layers a bit. We already have volcanics, so I would change igneous to plutonic and only use those rocks in appropriate locations. To help make provinces more distinct, I would remove metamorphic rocks from platforms and keep basins the way they are. Orogenic provinces should have a lot more metamorphics, so I would up that to 50 and reduce the sedimentary rocks to 10. We spoke about landforms earlier, and while some of them are limited to cold environments, there are no limitations on what province they can generate in since they actually come first in World Gen. So, something like a sinkhole landform, which in real life is created by collapsing cave systems in carbonate rocks, could generate in a large igneous province or a shield province, things that don't happen in real life. This is a nitpick though. If you wanted to fix this, you could have multiple alternatives for each landform, and if some unrealistic combo of landform and province occurred, you could swap it in for something else. Personally, I'm fine with it the way it is though. It requires you to dig into the game quite a bit to know, and it doesn't really change anything about the gameplay. Another thing you might have noticed is that Vintage Story has no rivers. There are only varying sizes of ponds and rivulets every once in a while to add something dynamic. You can edit world gen settings and get much bigger bodies of water, but rivers are a difficult problem to solve when you have no idea where the closest ocean or pond will be. In real life, surface topography is divided up into watersheds, where all the rain in that area that doesn't become groundwater ends up in the same stream. When I chatted with Tyron, the lead dev, he said they are working on it, and it is listed on the roadmap for something to add. After the rock strata are in place, World Gen applies cave carvers and then some surface details like soil, gravel, ice, tall grass, etc. Then some geologic features, World Gen structures, higher lakes, story structures, and finally shrubs, trees, rivulets, and lighting, snow layers if needed, and then lastly, creatures are spawned. We were talking about ores in the next video, and they have their own noise maps, but many of these later world generations are driven by combinations of the other maps, like temperature, rainfall, forest, and mushrooms. And these, along with elevation and latitude-based temperatures, contribute to the creation of biomes. We like sharp lines on a map, but you usually don't step over a line and have entirely different plants and animals. The Vintage Story Wiki has this Holdridge life zone plot, which in real life is used to predict soil and vegetation given inputs of humidity, precipitation, and evaporation. And this is sort of related to the system that Vintage Story uses, but instead of defining certain biomes and having a list of plants and animals that can be in that biome, each Vintage Story plant and animal has a range of temperature, rain, and forest cover that they are allowed to generate or spawn in. This creates a more smooth transition between climates and random events like this single redwood I found while making this. Being pedantic, I would add some input from the lithic material below it as well, like I mentioned when we talk about the soils. Vintage Story does a good job with their variety of plants, and reaching a realistic representation in a game is nearly impossible. If we looked at a real biome, like a prairie that most people would think of as simple, just a bunch of grass, in reality, it's hundreds of plant species, and they in turn support a diverse ecosystem of animals. But could Vintage Story be better? I do think that Vintage Story could add some more medium-sized plants. Most of the bushes in the temperate climate are just tree leaves. And sure, it could add dozens of more species, but we are also dealing with a pixelated voxel game. I love that it has a sedge, which is not a grass, but visually and gameplay-wise, it doesn't matter much. But then again, this game does have 119 species of butterflies, some of them being sexually dimorphic and having them distributed all based on different rain, forest, elevation, and temperatures. So maybe it could stand to have a few dozen more meadow and wetland species. Tyron, if you're interested, I am serious when I say I'd be willing to help. I would love to have a grass and sedge greenhouse in my survival world, and I can't wait for mushroom farming to be added. Overall, Vintage Story World Gen is very good. And that's going to wrap up part 1. The next episode will cover structures, caves, ores, mining, and other geologic related mechanics. I do want to say that the World Gen is highly customizable. There are a ton of settings to change. 50,000 blocks too far to walk to get to the equator? Change it. Want an island world and tons of ocean? Change it. Taller build height? Increased difficulty? Decreased difficulty? No eldritch horrors? Change it. Want to just build some things? It has a built-in world editor. You are able to do all of this in vanilla, and the game includes built-in mod support. There is a huge Discord community and a good player base if you have questions. If you are interested in the game, you have to buy it from them. No Steam, GOG, or Epic Store. I'll give my overall gameplay thoughts at the end of part 2, but if you do try it out, my suggestion to you is to try a world and explore and make mistakes. My permanent survival world was the third one I made after playing the game for a good few hours and just trying to understand what I was doing and what I wanted to do. I use the default settings for my world because I wanted to experience the game as it comes in the box. But personally, if I was redoing it just for fun now, I think I would make larger bodies of water and reduce the world size a bit. Huge thanks to Tyron for chatting with me and helping me understand some of the world gen and commands. I hope you have a nice day, and I will see you next time.